All right, so today we are talking about circumference. We talked about circles on Friday, and we talked about the different parts of the circle that make up a circle. We know a circle is a plane figure. We talked about chords, diameters, radius, central angle, arc. So when we talk about circumference today, circumference is still dealing with circles, and the distance around the circle is called the circumference. So it's not inside the circle, it's what's around the circle. The distance around the circle is where we get circumference. And so today we're going to learn how to find the circumference using both the diameter, which is the entire length across the circle, and the radius, which remember is half. Half the diameter was the radius. We talked about that on Friday. So today when we're finding circumference, you'll be using both the diameter and the radius to be able to find the circumference of a circle. So when we first take a look at the definition, circumference is the distance around a circle, around the outside edge of a circle, not on the inside. This symbol, pi, it's got two lines with a like kind of a wavy T. It's like almost like a double T, but the top of it's wavy. And that's the symbol for pi. P-I, not P-I-E like you eat. That would be a homophone. Pi, P-I. And that's the circumference. Pi is the circumference divided by diameter. Now, pi is always equal to, look at this number, you guys, 3.14159265359. Okay, really way too long. So when we talk about pi, we just use 3.14. So like March 14th, they always call it Pi Day because it's March 14th. 3.14 is pi. So pi equals 3.14. Now, today you're also going to learn that pi can equal 22/7 as a fraction. This is also considered pi, but pretty much from this point forward, as you move through in your life, you're always going to see pi as 3.14. But we're going to be working with both of these today, 22/7 and 3.14 on your homework for pi. Now, when we look at the formula for pi, when we take a look at the formula to find pi, so when you find the circumference, which is c, of a circle, you have to multiply pi by the length of the diameter. So to find circumference, we have to multiply pi by the length of diameter. So if you know the diameter of a circle, the formula is going to be C equals, circumference equals, pi times diameter. So if you have the formula already, you know that all you're going to do is multiply pi times diameter. So if we look at my circle right here, we've got a circle right here, and it shows me I have the diameter. It's the entire length. So remember, the diameter went from all the way across, and it had to pass through the center. Diameter. Circumference, this outside circle, but to find the circumference, we need to know the diameter. So on this one, it's 4 yards. So all we did here was plug in the formula. I've got C equals pi times diameter. Now I'm going to put the numbers in there. C equals, well, pi is 3.14 times, here's my diameter, 4. So all I did was fill in the numbers. Now, 3.14 times 4 in my head, don't know it. So I'm going to do it out here to the side. So when we look over here at my work, we have 3.14 times 4 multiplied just like normal. We ignore that decimal point. We don't put any decimal points in until we're done multiplying. Once we're finished, I notice that here's one decimal point with 2 numbers behind it. So I know in my answer, I have to have 1 decimal point with 2 numbers behind it. However many numbers are behind the decimal point in the problem, that's how many numbers are behind the decimal point in your answer. So in this case, C equals 12.56 yards. That's the distance around the circle if that diameter is 4 yards. Now, I'm going to show you an example with 22/7 just to remind you multiplying with fractions. But also I want to do one with radius because we know if we have the radius, then we don't have the whole diameter, we only have half of it. If you have the diameter of a circle and not the radius, or if you have the radius, let me say that again, if you have the radius of a circle and not diameter, you're going to have a little bit different formula. Up here, if you have the diameter, all you have to do is multiply pi times diameter. Plug in the numbers, multiply. But if you have the radius, we can't do that. So we have to multiply pi times twice the length of the radius because we know the radius is times 2. So let's take a look at this one. If I have this circle here and I know the radius is 7 yards, I can see that. Here's what my formula is going to look like. Circumference equals pi times 2 times radius. We have to do it times 2 because we know the radius is half that diameter and we need to know the diameter. So the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we multiply the radius times 2. So the first thing I'm going to do, all I'm going to do is plug in the formula. I'm not going to do anything yet. C equals, remember this time I told you pi was going to equal 22/7. On your homework it's split that way and we'll look at it when we get to homework. There's the 2, I left it the same. Now instead of an R, I put the 7 because that's my radius. Okay, all I did was plug in the numbers from my formula. So let's take a look at what that would look like. C equals 22/7 times, I did 7 times 2, my friends, which equals 14. And we know anytime we have a whole number when we're multiplying fractions, we have to put it over 1. So that's all I did here. I left this the exact same. I multiplied these two numbers and I put it over 1. Now, I'm going to cross reduce. That's the first thing I'm going to look for. 22 and 1, I know I can't do anything, but I notice a 14 and a 7 here. And that's going to make my multiplying a little bit easier. So let's take a look at that. I can make the 7 into a 1. I can make that 14 into a 2. Then that just leaves me with 22 times 2, 44. 1 times 1 is 1. There's my answer. Circumference equals 44 yards. So if you have the diameter, it's just pi times diameter. But if you have the radius, we have to do pi times 2 times radius. And then once you have those formulas, once you have the formula, all you're doing is plugging in the numbers. We're going to start with focusing on the 3.14, and then we're going to practice a couple with the 22/7 because your homework has you doing it both ways. So I want to make sure that you're comfortable doing both ways. So let's start with 3.14. I'm going to show you this circle first here. So if I have this one first, and I'm going to use 3.14 to start. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write my formula because it makes it a lot easier if I have my formula. So circumference equals pi times diameter. I know the formula on this one because I have the diameter. Since I have the diameter, since it goes all the way across, I'm using the diameter formula. Simple as that. If you have the diameter already, that's your formula. If you only have the radius, this isn't your formula, my friends. You got to use the radius formula. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to plug in my numbers here. C equals pi is 3.14. I just plug that in. Times diameter, there's my diameter, it's 2. Okay, all I did was plug in my numbers. Now I'm going to solve this. I'm going to do 3.14 times 2. 4 times 2 is 8. 2 times 1 is 2. 3 times 2 is 6. Now I've got to look and see. How many numbers do I see behind a decimal point? 1, 2. How many numbers do I see behind a decimal point here? I have to have 2. So I'm going to put it there, 1, 2. So I know that C is going to equal 6.28, can't forget that label, meters. Since I had the diameter, I used the diameter formula. Since I had the diameter, I used the diameter formula, pi times diameter. All I did was plug in the numbers. Pi is 3.14, the diameter was 2. I multiplied those two, and then I made sure I had my labor. All right, let's take a look at this one. Again, I have the diameter here. I can see I have the length of the diameter. So I know my formula on this one. C equals pi times diameter. It is much easier if you do your homework this exact same way. Write out the formula. Write out the formula. So all you have to do is fill it in and then solve the problem. All right, so if we take a look at this, now I'm going to fill in my formulas. C equals, well, pi is 3.14, so I'm going to write 3.14 times, it says diameter. I'm going to look right there. There's my diameter, 4, just like that. Now I've got to solve this. These aren't ones I can do in my head, and if I did, I'd be lazy, and you know, lazy makes me crazy. I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to multiply it. 4 times 4 is 16. Carry 1. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5. 4 times 3 is 12. Now I'm back to where I was. How many numbers do I see behind a decimal point? I see 2 numbers behind a decimal point here. I know I have to have 2 numbers behind a decimal point here. We can't forget that. So in this case, C is going to equal 12.56 yards. We can't forget our label. Okay? If we have diameter, that's what it's going to look like. Now, let's take a look at what it would look like if it was radius. If it's radius, I'm doing it a little bit different because radius, I don't have the whole length of the circle. So let me take a look if it's radius now. If I have, sorry, I have to redraw my circles. Okay, let's take a look at this. Now, this time, I only have half the circle. I only have the radius. I only have half. So I know this time I have to use the radius formula. If you have the diameter, guys, you're using the diameter formula. If you only have the radius, we're using the radius formula. Pi times 2 times r. I have the radius, I'm using the radius formula. That's all I wrote down. Now I'm going to fill in the numbers for this. I already have my formula down. So pi, 3.14. 2 is going to stay the same. My radius is right there, so I'm going to fill in my radius. Okay, now I'm working through these numbers. So it looks like I'm going to have 3.14 times, look what it is, 2 times 3. So I'm going to write it like this, 3.14 times 6. Then I'm going to solve this. 6 times 4 is 24. 6 times 1 is 6 plus 2 is 8. 6 times 3 is 18. I can't leave it like that because it's not 1,084. I know I have 2 numbers here behind the decimal. I have to have 2 numbers here behind the decimal. So C equals 18.84 meters. Since I had the radius, I used the radius formula. Same thing on this one. Again, I don't have the entire length. I only have the radius. So I'm going to start off right off the bat. Write what formula you're using. If you see you have the radius, you're going to write down the radius formula. If you see you have the diameter, you're going to write down the diameter formula. I'd keep your math book open to page 340 because you can see the 2 different formulas right there. If you don't, that way, or you can write it down and take notes when you're watching me. Either way, know your formulas. That's all you need, and plug in the numbers here. All right, C equals 3.14. I just plugged in the pi. The 2 stays the same. Radius is 7. Okay, now I'm just going to solve this. 3.14 times, look what I have here, 7 times 2. 3.14 times 14. So I have 4 times 4 is 16. I'm going to carry 1. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5. 4 times 3 is 12. Now, I'm not done because I still have a number in the tens. So I know I have to put 0 as a placeholder because I need to start in the tens. Since I'm starting in the tens here, I'm starting in the tens here. I'm going to get rid of that one I carried. 1 times 4 is 4. 1 times 1 is 1. 3 times 1 is 3. I have to add my partial products up. 6 plus 0 is 6. 5 plus 4 is 9. 2 plus 1 is 3. 3 plus 1 is 4. Now, I have to go back up to my problem. How many numbers do we see behind a decimal point? Here's the only decimal point, and there are 2 numbers behind it. 2 numbers behind the decimal here means 2 numbers behind the decimal here. So C equals 43.96 yards. Since I had the diameter radius, I used the radius formula. Now, I'm going to do a couple with you with the 22/7 because your homework does make you do that. And it tells you which formula they want you to use. So when you plug in your numbers, you're going to plug in 22/7 or 3.14 based on what the homework tells you to do. So we're going to do it. I'll do 2 of these so you can see these 2 so you know what we're doing here. I'll do this one. Okay, so let's take a look at the first one. same thing. I see that I have the radius. So I'm going to use the radius formula. So I'm going to go ahead and write that radius formula. C equals pi times 2 times r. If we have the radius, that's the radius formula. Pi times 2 times r. This time, I'm going to use 22/7 instead of 3.14. The good news is, guys, is that every one of them on your homework, you're going to be able to cross-reduce. And then I have times 2 times, I'm just going to fill in the r, which is 7. Okay, that's all I did, fill in the numbers. C equals 22/7 times, all right, what do I have here? I have 7 times 2, which is 14. So when I do that, I'm going to have 14. But I know when I multiply fractions, I need to have my whole number over 1. Okay? Cross reduce here. I'm going to make this a 1. I'm going to make this a 2. Then I've got this easy duck thing here. I've got 22 times 2, which is 44, over 1. So I know C equals 44 yards. Simplest form. We don't leave it over 1. 44 yards. Radius, all I did was use the radius formula, plugged in the numbers, I did the math. Let's take a look at this one. This time I have the diameter, so I'm going to use the diameter formula. C equals pi times diameter. That's all there is to it when it's the diameter. Plug these numbers in. C equals 22/7 times, well, my diameter is 28. Have to put it over 1 because it's a whole number. Now I'm going to look. Can I cross reduce? Absolutely. This becomes a 1. This becomes a 4. That's a much better number to do. So now I have 22 times 4, which is going to be 88 over 1. And then I know C is going to equal 88 meters. I just plugged in the diameter there. You'll have some with 3.14 and some with 22/7. On the ones that you have to do 22/7 on, every one of them is cross-reducible, so make sure you're looking for that. Don't forget to put your whole number over 1 on those. All right, so let's take a look at your homework today. We are going to be doing workbook 121, workbook 121. Now, the good news is right here at the top of the page, I also noticed they have got the formulas for you. If you have the diameter, it shows you right there. Pi equals, or C equals pi times diameter. And then all they did was plug in the numbers just like I just showed you. Right next to it, there's the formula for radius. And that 22/7, or it doesn't matter. It's the same formula, pi times 2 times radius. If you have the radius, pi times diameter. If you have the diameter, it doesn't matter if you're using 3.14 or 22/7. That's the same formula across the board. If you have the diameter, pi times diameter. If you have the radius, pi times 2 times radius. Once you write down the formula for whatever one you're working on, then all you're doing is plugging in numbers. So use those at the top to help you too. So if we look at the first section, 1 through 6, if we take a look at 1 through 6, it says on 1 through 6, find the circumference of each circle, use pi equals 3.14. So on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, every single time you use pi, when you fill in the formula, you're always going to use 3.14. The other thing I noticed, my friends, when I'm looking at this, 1, 2, and 3 are all diameter. I can see that. So I'm going to use the diameter formula and plug that in. 4, 5, 6, they are all radius. So I'm going to use the radius formula on 4, 5, and 6. Once you write down that formula, all you have to do is plug in the numbers and do the math. But on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you're using 3.14 for all of those for pi, and then multiplying the rest of it. Now, when we look at the 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, this time they want you to use 22/7 instead of 3.14. This time I notice 7, 8, 9 are all radius. So for the first 3 on this one, you're going to use the radius formula, but you're using 22/7 when you plug in your pi. 10, 11, and 12, they all have diameter. So all you're doing is using the diameter formula and using 22/7 for pi. Every one of these can be cross-reduced with that 7, so be looking for that. It will make your math much easier. Label on all of those. Label, label, label. All you have to do is 1 through 12. You do not have to do 13 and 14. I just want you to do 1 through 12 on these. 1 through 6, you're using 3.14. 7 through 12, you're using 22/7 for pi. Only 1 through 12.